Ever had a student explain something in such a way that made the class go, oh, now I get it? What if we could make that happen almost every day? Welcome to Math Actually, where math meets real talk. And in this four-part series, we've been diving into student agency and ownership, one game-changing strategy at a time. And today, we're flipping the script. In this final episode of this series, we are talking about student math coaches, a powerful shift that transforms students from passive learners to active leaders. And if you've ever wished that your early finishers could do more than just sit there, this one's for you. Let's get into it. And welcome back, Gina, for our final episode of this series. Anyone listening, if this is the first one that you've tuned into, you have to go back and check out the previous three so that you can learn all about different specific strategies you can literally use tomorrow in your classroom that will help boost student agency and student ownership over their learning. But for this final episode of this series, Gina, I know that you've guided us through a number of tools to boost student agency that seemingly reverse traditional roles of teachers and students by empowering them to make corrections of their own mistakes, to lead mathematical discussions, and to even create their own problems. But for this particular episode, I wanted for you to just open this up and talk to us a little bit about positioning students as math coaches inside the classroom. Mm-hmm. And I know you've talked about this, and I'm curious, how did you first arrive at this strategy?
Well, I must give credit where credit is due, and it was really inspired by a first grader. And one day she just said to me, because I was a math coach, and she was like, I want to be a math coach too. And I'm like, are you serious about that? She's like, yeah, I really want to learn how to be a math coach. So I had teamed up with another math coach. I'll say her name, Tanya Palmieri. And we really took this on seriously. And we're like, she really needed that boost. And so we're like, how do we help elevate her to be a math coach? Well, we taught her, Tanya taught her how to run a number talk. Well, lo and behold, she ran that number talk like nobody's business. I mean, she asked the kids, what do you think? What's another way to do it? I mean, she was amazing. So then I was like, okay, how do we take this? Because the kids paid attention more because she was leading the discussion. There was a whole other level of respect. I'm like, wow, you don't even need classroom rules. You just ran it like a boss. And then she's like, I want to learn more. So then we thought about, well, how do we position students as coaches? So the way that we really started on this journey was being inspired by seeing this first grader lead a number talk in a way that was so powerful and also engaged kids in ways that we hadn't seen. Even kids that were on the shy side wanted to participate in those discussions because they didn't want to let her down. It was so interesting. So I just think there's a lot of power in student math coaches.
That's pretty cool. I agree. I can picture students, if there's a student brave enough to do what you just described, that their peers will definitely give them, in some ways, their undivided attention more so than they would give to me, right? Because it's like, wow, I want to listen to my peer do this. And that's interesting that this came from a first grader, right? Sometimes we can learn the greatest lessons from the youngest, right? I think that's cool. So then I guess coming on this idea of math coaches, I guess my question would be, how do you plan for integrating student math coaches into a math block?
Mm-hmm. So, well, first you do have to dedicate some time to actually establishing what a math coach does. So on your first day that you launch them, the first thing you have to do even before starting is you have to make them little badges. So we made them little badges that said math coach on the front, and on the back they had the questions that I talked about in episode 2, which is like, where are you stuck? What is your next step? What do you think you can do next? What strategies have you tried? So we gave them questions that math coaches would ask. And we put them on lanyards and we put all their names on it. Some teachers actually included their picture. And we created those first. So you have to have your badges ready to go. Then, and if you wanted just a standard set, you could just make, if you're a middle school teacher, you could just make 4 or 5 of them. Then what we did was we said, okay, we want to roll out student math coaches. And then we talked about what math coaches do because, this is a newer role to them. So we created an anchor chart. Math coaches, some of the things that we talked about is math coaches don't give answers. They ask questions. They support your learning, they cheer you on, they maybe share or some of your ideas. So send over other groups to your group because they're coaching the room. And so they want to make sure that your ideas are shared. So we create this anchor chart of what math coaches do. And then what we do is we launch into a problem. Now, I'm sure every teacher has experienced this, those early finishers, right? What do we do with the early finishers? Well, what we learned is early finishers really love to be math coaches. And you might say, well, how is that stretching their thinking? Well, what happens is once we give them the badge and say, okay, you're the math coach, and we pick usually 2 to 3 kids per lesson when we actually do them, is they get to see other people's mathematical ideas and really say, like, oh, wow, I solved that in a different way. So they'll even ask the person, like, how did you solve that? And what happens over time is kids get really excited about being the math coach because you're elevated in the room. Like you're not just a student or a mathematician, now you're the coach. So you could see them, they're proud of it, they're circulating the room. And then the teacher is usually, we tell them to keep track of who you've elevated as a coach so you can choose different people at different times. And for us, it was a really great way to strengthen their identity, to activate their agency, and also get them up and around the room so they can see the ideas of others and be able to see that math is not just done in one way, that there's many ways that we can do math, while also asking very powerful questions that are on the back of their badges.
Now that's really interesting because as you were talking through that, I was thinking, I was kind of picturing, students helping other students, which I think is awesome. But I am curious if you could touch on what exactly is the student math coach's role, if there's anything extra besides those things. But then also, how do you prepare a student to be that coach?
So, the things that they do mostly is once we've, like, so we might launch a task, and once, like, we use a lot of vertical surfaces in our classroom. So they would go around and visit other groups and ask questions. So we always say great coaches ask really good questions. They also direct kids towards other boards. So, like, let's say, Chuck, your group was stuck. The coach might instead say, hey, go over to so and so's board, see what they're doing. So instead of the teacher always doing it, we noticed that students really could do it too. And it really came out of the teacher noticing that, when you have 30 kids in a room, she couldn't exactly get to every single board. And so the coach would kind of co lead with her. And the other important piece is the coach would also debrief with the teacher and say, these are the things that I've noticed, and these boards are the really interesting boards that I think you should uplift, because then you're also like elevating like what they think is good, right? So as teachers, we're always selecting and sequencing the boards that we think should be noted, but the coach actually has some say in what boards get shared, which is super powerful if you think about it, because normally the teacher is always sequencing it. The other thing that coaches do is here I had a second grader who was a math coach, and she actually took a number routine, so it was an ESTA mysteries, but she went home, no, actually it was a splat. She went home and created her own splat and then brought it in and ran her own number talk. And the reason why she did that is because she knew that she could be a coach, because she had been a coach the day before on a task. So then she just said to the teacher, well, I made this problem, or we've even had kids come in and bring problems and say, hey, I found this problem online. It's kind of an interesting problem. Could I do it? And we let them start the lesson with that. So I think what happens is when you empower kids to be coaches, which is really a semi like leader, you help to elevate them in a way where they feel like their ideas are valued, they matter, and then they're also collaborating with the teacher on, hey, these are some interesting ways that kids are doing math around the room that I noticed when I circulated. Because, those traditional gallery walks don't always get the outcome that I necessarily wanted, but these coaches notice things that nobody else notices because it is their job, because they're in this coaching role.
Did you ever come into any issues with students not becoming coaches? Like, does every kid become a coach, or is this something that have you ever had any issues of kids that didn't become coaches, or anything along those lines? I was just curious about that.
So, I mean, in an elementary classroom, we automatically made everyone a badge and they had their picture on it, just to say everybody here has mathematical knowledge that someone else doesn't have. Because, there's going to be topics, geometry, measurement, um, whether it's in number and operations or algebraic thinking, every kid has a strength area. Somewhere it's going to hit for them. So I think that was always the key, is like we were really trying to think as we were looking through our work, and we would see kids, as they're working on their assignments. Like, let's say they were after their correction station, they got the whole sheet right. Boom, you're going to be the coach. And kids, again, these are all integrated practices that I've been talking about. If you've been doing correction stations for a while and you really get that real time feedback and you're feeling good about stuff, it gets you more ready for these roles. If we teach math in traditional ways, I agree, Chuck, you're not going to get every kid to be a coach. But if you're integrating all the things that I've been talking about, like making sure they have these question and sentence stems, making sure that they're writing their own problems, making sure that they have the opportunity to correct and get immediate feedback, all of those little things build up to this idea of math coaches. But when they do that, it's so fascinating because they will work so hard. And I will say one of the things we found out that kids know a lot more math than we thought, because all of a sudden when they had this opportunity to have a leadership role, they tried a little bit harder. And it's not one that's out loud, because I know you talked about introverts. So even my introverts wanted it, because it wasn't that you were talking in front of the class. If you wanted that number talk experience, you could. It was more that you got to circulate the boards and ask people, like, where are you? What step are you on? What do you think you need to do next? And every kid could ask questions. Plus, we gave them the questions. So if they got stuck, they would just check their things. So it was scaffolded in a way that everyone could do it, but it was also so empowering that every kid wanted to be part of it in some way, because it wasn't public necessarily. Like if you walked into our classroom, the only way you'd know who the coach was by the badge, but they would be circulating with the kids. And we usually did it on days that we kept kids at vertical surfaces, not necessarily on a day where kids were sitting at their desks, because that doesn't lend itself to movement. We did it on days where kids were standing or working on a task standing up, maybe at the perimeter of the room. And when movement was happening, that was the best time to really introduce the coach that day.
I love the fact that you tied into everything that we've been talking about. So it's not just, and I would recommend anyone that's listening to the podcast go back and listen to all the different episodes, because this is almost like a system that you can implement, right? Like you can think about how you can transform your classroom, because it all builds off of one another, right? So and that's how the math coaches then would work, and it makes complete sense. And I just wanted to get that clarification for people listening that might have been thinking that same thing. So then I guess I'm curious, based on all of that, what skills and strengths have you seen literally evolve in students that act as math coaches in the classroom?
So there's a couple of different things. They get enhanced math vocabulary because they're usually talking about the same topic over and over again. So if I'm this coach for that particular task, and let's say the task is focused on perimeter, I'm probably saying the word perimeter over 20 times. So how did you get that perimeter, or what is the perimeter on that? Or have you thought about a different way to make that perimeter? I mean, you could see the level of math vocabulary and just using it over and over. That repetition is going to help them. So that's just one skill. The second one is how to pose purposeful questions. So I had said earlier on, it's important that not only teachers pose purposeful questions, but kids pose purposeful questions of each other. One of the really powerful visuals I like to use is the discussion in your class should just not go teacher, student, teacher, student, teacher, student. It should also go student to student or between students. So it builds their ability to ask questions, because as we build, students to be critical thinkers and inquirers and be ready for jobs that we know don't even exist yet, Chuck, but they're going to happen. Probably one of the most powerful skills you can teach kids is how to ask really good questions and to be curious about things and solve problems. And part of what a coach does is they are asking those questions and looking at different ways that problems are solved beyond the way that they've thought about it. So, sometimes people think, oh, are you using the coach to be an extra teacher? No, it's the opposite. I'm helping the coach to feel empowered to ask really good questions, to be able to see other ways to solve problems, to deepen their learning. Because anytime I see a different variation of how I've solved the problem, I have a whole other area of expertise. So that's why rotating the coach is so important. And then the other piece that I see as a skill is we're building their social skills. We always talk about social emotional learning. Well, building relationships between their peers and knowing how to interact with others, especially from different cultures, different languages, is very important. We're building global citizens. I talk about this all the time whenever I speak, is very important. So the students in our classroom are going to be exposed to people from all over the world because the internet has kind of flattened the world and all of that's happening in AI. Well, we have to prepare them for working with diverse people who speak diverse languages. And being a coach gets you there because in a diverse classroom or even in any classroom, you're learning interpersonal skills, how to ask questions, proximity, how close should I be when I ask questions to people, and just how do I learn from others, and a critical skill, which is listening. Listening is a skill that is very important, and a really good coach, listens. And I remember when we wrote our anchor chart and we said, what does a coach need to do? We spent a lot of time at what it means to listen, and not just listen to respond, but listen to understand. And I remember early on with the coaches, the first thing they would do is like kids would speak and they would jump in. I'm like, no, you didn't even let them finish their sentence. And listening is a really important skill. Like I'm sure some people maybe are fast forwarding through this podcast, right? Because everyone's in a rush. But listening is really important because people are going to expose you to ideas. Like a lot of what I shared over these 4 episodes are really things that I've either read in a book, I've listened to children because they really are the inspiration for a lot of this stuff, or really listen to other teachers or seen their amazing practice. So coaching and implementing student coaches has social emotional skills built in, mathematical skills, and the skill of discourse and asking really important questions. And then there's also leadership skills in there. So it's just, there's so much in that role. I mean, think about it. For someone to be a head coach in an NFL or be a math coach, you have to have so many skills. And yet, if we empower kids to say, let's start doing this early on so you can start to build that skill so you're really ready as we send you out into the world, is going to be way more valuable. And they're also going to feel so much better about themselves and see themselves as mathematicians.
It's really true. Everything you had said there, especially the skill-based thing. I think sometimes we we try and find ways where we could teach our students and the kids that we're teaching those types of skills, and we often think, well, I have to do that separate from what I'm doing in the classroom. And this is a perfect example of how to teach so many skills that go beyond math, that go beyond what they're even learning, but it's incorporating what they're learning. It's almost like that perfect match. And I also loved how you had said that this isn't just you having another teacher in the room. Like this math coach isn't just, oh, I just have another teacher, right? It's so much more than that. And I guess I want to end this particular episode, and I guess our series, with a really simple question, because that has to do with math coaches, because I think there might be people that are on the fence, or they're thinking, well, this is something that I think I might want to try, but they might be concerned on how the peers of these math coaches may react. So I think my question would be, in your experience, how do the peers respond to a student as a math coach? Like, are they energized? Are they more engaged? Do they want to try it themselves? Like, how do they respond?
So I think it all depends on how you set the stage. So if you set the routines as this being a really important job in our school, in our classroom community, it's something that we value. Really, you have to have a strong classroom community to roll something like this out. But what we've seen is when we do roll them out in those communities, there is a feeling of rooting for those coaches. That's the sentiment that we get, because at some point they know they're going to have that role. And so there's a responsibility around wanting to show kindness, respect, and that same grace that you would want and I would want, because we know at some point we're going to have that role. That's what I think the key is making sure that they understand at some point you're going to be the coach in the room. So you want to make sure you're treating that coach the way that you wanted to be treated. And after that, honestly, we've never had dialogue about it. Like, it just is something exciting. They're happy for one another when they're elevated. We actually, in one classroom in particular, the teacher highlights the coach of the day and puts their picture up, and it's like this big deal. The parents get a message like, hey, Chuck was math coach for the day. The parents are like, what? This is awesome. Like, it elevates it. It's the intentionality. If your intention is to be able to is to elevate students and all of them at some point in your class, then they know that and they're going to trust you, and they elevate the student that's being the coach. And usually we have at least two going at the same time. It isn't just one for the room, it's at least two. Because usually kids work in pairs, those two early finishers or maybe two other students that you pick. And I don't know, we really haven't had a problem, but I have to say the stage was set, the conditions were set, and we also were monitoring that to make sure that kids were doing it. But I don't know, they didn't have that sense of like wanting to not be nice to them. And even in a middle school classroom, like we rolled it out in grade 6, and I'm like, okay, how's it going to go in grade 6? Because now you're in grade 6. It was actually more appreciated, and we actually did student interviews after. And you know what they said? They said the reason why we like the coaches is because we understood things explained by our peers sometimes better than the teacher. And I was like, what? And I was not expecting to hear that they would say that at all. And they also said that we know we would get our turn, so we would never mad. And that was so powerful. Like, I didn't expect them to say that at all. That's why when teachers roll things out, one of the most important pieces out of everything that I've said is make sure, I know time is valuable, but get someone to actually sit down and talk with the kids after they've done it. What you're going to learn from their reflections is, if you think it's good when you hear kids talk about it, it's going to be 10 times better. When we asked kids about how it felt to be a coach, you would have thought they won an Emmy or a Grammy. It was unbelievable. And I was like, it was just a simple elevation, but you know what it is? In most classrooms, they don't ever get to be on stage. They don't ever get a leadership opportunity. They don't ever get to share their expertise. So if you can do that, what you're doing is really giving them a leadership role in a subject that really needs leadership.
Really well said. And I would agree. I think our goal obviously is to help our students become better leaders, become better citizens, and all of this kind of ties into that. So I guess I have just one last thing. As we finish the entire series, I'm just curious. The entire series with you, Gina. Say, if you could say one thing to the teachers as we end this, what would it be?
So something that I think is really important for everyone to know is I had no idea what math identity was as a student or early on in my teaching. I had no idea what that was, math identity. But what I did know is, as a student, I almost felt invisible in most math classrooms. I wasn't like the top math kid in my room because everybody knew who that was. I wasn't ever at the bottom, but I just felt invisible. And all of the things that I've talked about today really help kids to see themselves as leaders invisible. And that's what builds math identity, which then activates their agency, which is what everybody wants. Like, every teacher has said to me, I want the kids to just jump into the problems and lead the learning and talk about math. Well, that just doesn't happen overnight. There are some foundational skills. There's some mathematical skills they need to know. There's some SEL skills they need to know. There's some discourse skills they need to know. All of these foundational elements, and there needs to be a strong community. But at the end of the day, I think what's really important is that every kid wants to be seen in those math classrooms. And the way you can do that is through these practices. And the math world talks about it as math identity, but it's, do you see yourself as a mathematician? Do you have mathematical skills? And do you feel like you can use math to make a change in the world? And I think that's the power behind everything that I've been talking about, is that when you do these things, kids not only see themselves, like I never wrote a math problem about myself. I never got to ask questions of my peers. I never got to correct my own papers. I would have loved to do all that stuff. So basically, I took all the things that I would have loved to do as a kid and put them into a math classroom to give kids agency, to elevate their identity to the point where they all saw themselves as mathematicians in some way. And that's really the big message that I want people to understand, that when you empower kids and you give them the opportunity to shine, they will shine. But you have to set the stage and create the routines that really help that, to foster that in any math classroom.
That is an awesome way to end our series. Thank you so much for that, Gina. And thank you so much for jumping on our podcast here, Math Actually, and just being a part of it, and for sharing your brilliance. I just wanted to say thank you again. And anyone who has not listened to this particular series, you need to go back, listen to episode 1, 2, 3, and 4, and I think that it will change how you think about student ownership, student agency, and really running your math classroom. So Gina, thank you so much for taking the time to spend these last 4 episodes chatting about math. All right, that's a wrap on this episode, as well as this entire 4-part series with Gina Rivera on student agency. Now, we've covered correction stations to class-led discussions, student-authored problems, and now peer math coaches. And we've seen just how much students can lead when we give them the chance. So here's your Math Actually recap for this episode. Number 1, start small. Give students a role and even offer them one question that they can ask. Number 2, make the badge. This is a simple lanyard that can turn math into a mission. Number 3, coach the coaches. Give them the tools to listen, ask, and lead, and it'll be awesome to see where they go. Number 4, keep it rotating. Every student has brilliance worth sharing, so give them the chance. So you don't have to change your whole classroom overnight, but imagine what could happen if just one student sees themselves differently. Because if a badge that says math coach can change everything, why not try it out? Now, if you love this episode, go back and binge the full series. Episodes 1 through 3 are packed with ready-to-use tools that build toward exactly what you heard today. And remember, you're not just teaching math, you're building mathematicians, one strategy, one student, one shift at a time. I'll catch you next time on Math Actually.